Is Australia's latest cybersecurity strategy just another power grab by intelligence agencies?
And are Samsung's new notes worth their premium price tag? Or does Google's cheap Pixel 4a represent a better bargain?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there, welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcast where we sneak across the state borders to catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the big tech news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, based in Melbourne, and I'm joined by Alex Kidman, a Sydney-sider who's dug in like an Alabama tick. Alex, is there any room for your family in the doomsday shelter after you've squeezed in all your retro gaming consoles?
Look, my kids know where the priority order sits, although they have started challenging me to games of Donkey Kong Jr. to try and get out of their household chores.
I don't like their chances, to be honest.
It's a bit of a sucker bet, yeah.
We're also joined once again in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by a longtime friend of the show and News Corp National Technology Editor, Jen Dudley-Nicholson. Jen, welcome back to the show. How's the lockdown treating you in the People's Republic of Queensland?
Look, the sun is shining, as is mandated, and hopefully the virus is on its way out. So I'm cool with it.
A Victorian, a Queenslander, and a New South Welshman walk into a podcast. It's about the only way that you can get across the borders these days. This week, we're diving into all the latest smartphones, including Google's Pixel 4a, Samsung's hefty Note 20, and Huawei's heavy-hitting P40 Pro Plus. But first, we're diving into the murky world of cybersecurity, catching up with Australian cybersecurity expert Stilgherrian to talk about the government's new powers under this week's Australian cybersecurity strategy.
So this week sees the release of the Australian government's new cybersecurity strategy. It's full of the dark web and all the cybers, so we've tracked down Australia's most prominent writer on all the cybers, ZDNet cyber correspondent Stilgherrian, to explain what lurks behind the detail. So, Stilgherrian, is there much substance to the new strategy, and what does it really all mean?
Okay, well, the short answer is there's not as much substance as the previous one. It's not bad, but it's not brilliant either. So, you know, there's a lot to deal with here. I guess the important background to refresh people's memories about is that back in 2016, when a bloke called Malcolm Turnbull was still Prime Minister of Australia, he put out the 2016 cybersecurity strategy, and or he called it he didn't have a vision in it; it had a philosophy in it, which I thought was quite amusing.
Very Malcolm. Very Malcolm.
Very Malcolms. So, do you use the word Turnbullian or Malcomical?
I'm a fan of Malcomical. I was going to go with Turnbullian, but you've just won with Malcomical. That's a winner.
It was actually a good strategy. Like, it set forward this idea that we would be, and it sounds corny now, but a cyber smart nation, which is it's not a terrible slogan, but the idea was that being aware of and part of and a leader in the cyber world would become part of Australia's makeup. And it wouldn't just be about cyber security as such, it would be about cyber confidence, about cyber resilience in the community, both business and at the family level, and that Australia would reach out and really become a leader in the world. And in fact, that happened. We have a very successful diplomatic program through our Ambassador for Cyber Affairs. We've been teaching cybers in the region. We have been doing treaties. We have been active at the United Nations in trying to get everyone to behave a bit better in the cyber world. And until the coronavirus locked everything down, we had people from the region coming to us to learn cyber skills because, we're not Russia, we're not China, we're not America. We are seen as a bit more neutral. Yeah. So that was good. We set up AustCyber, the Cybersecurity Growth Centre, to sell quality Aussie-made cybers to the world, and so on. So that was 2016. And it was a 4-year strategy. So there was intended to be a new one by 2020. Makes sense. So late last year, after all this was shunted out of the Prime Minister's department to Home Affairs, with, of course, Australia's favourite Minister for Home Affairs, Peter Dutton, in charge, they announced late 2019 a new strategy is on the way. It would be out by April, then it'd be out by May, and then it would be out by June.
A familiar story, yeah.
And okay, but it finally dropped today. And what we have, as I wrote at ZDNet, it feels like sort of it's someone else's homework and Dutton has handed it up as his, because to advise the government on this, they set up an industry advisory panel, and it had Andy Penn, the CEO of Telstra. It had Darren Kane, who's the CISO of NBN Co. It had someone from one of the defence contractors and so on. Their report made something like 60 recommendations saying, hey, we should do all these things. And pretty much all of them are in the strategy. We also have a commitment by the government to spend $1.67 billion, brackets, over the next 10 years, in brackets, on the cybers. That's additional funding. Although $1.3 billion of that was announced like back in June. So there's really only 300 million new stuff. And although there's some good things in it, there's a lot of copy and paste going on here, let me just say.
I get the impression that short of Dutton is the web is dark and full of terrors.
Absolutely. I mean, today at the press conference, Thursday, as we're recording this, he was full on into the internet is an evil place and full of pedophiles and full of terrorists and so on. And if you're a terrorist, you should be worried about the new powers in the act. There really aren't that many. If you're a drug dealer, you should be worried. Quote, if you're part of the Australian community, the 99% of people that aren't involved in those activities, then I don't think you have anything to concern yourself with. Right.
See, I get nervous whenever Dutton plays the pedophile think of the children card, because to me that's a big red flag that they're trying to steamroll through something without too much opposition. Is there anything they're trying to push through, new powers, stuff like that?
The only, quote, only, unquote one is that ASIO and the Australian Federal Police also already have access to a thing called a computer access warrant. And they are normally only issued for things up at the national security level. There will be laws put forward at some point in the next 10 years to broaden the applicability of them to other kinds of crime. Now, in and of itself, that's not terrible, but as with all these things, it's a matter of looking at the details. And who knows, right? The one that amazes me about the strategy, though, here is a direct quote. Cybersecurity allows families and businesses to prosper from the digital economy, just as pool fences provide peace of mind for households. So,
oh my God,
the dangerous internet is a swimming pool.
And you've got to wear sunscreen. Don't forget your sunscreen.
Don't get me started on COVID safe. I will be here all day, all week. But to me, the strategy itself does talk about building resilience, cyber resilience in business, in the community, and so on. So if we're going with the swimming pool metaphor, resilience is teaching people to swim and perform CPR.
Yeah.
It's not about the fence. I don't know. I mean, I guess this thing took 11 months to gestate. It was 4 months behind schedule when it arrived. I expected something a bit more substantial. And the other thing for me, though, is that there's an action list. Good. There's an action list. There's no target date for any of this. And so if the money is spread over 10 years, is this a matter of, we'll get to it sometime in the next decade, maybe? And the word quantum appears nowhere in it.
Well,
is that good or bad?
Yeah, I was going to say, is that good? Is that good, bad, or should we be hiring Scott Bakula at some point?
Ooh, putting that fascinating thought aside, quantum encryption and breaking quantum encryption is going to be the thing over the next decade, right? And Australia is currently a leader in quantum encryption. There is an Australian company that actually sells quantum-generated random numbers to the US Department of State, and then they go somewhere in America. Like, that's good. So, and University of New South Wales is totally across this stuff. Making Australia a leader in that would be an incredible strategic advantage. Nowhere in the strategy.
I was going to ask you, actually, because you keep mentioning that it's a 10-year strategy. The previous one was a 4-year strategy.
I don't know. There's no date in it.
Well, it's broadly maybe a 10-year strategy.
There's a 10-year kind of pretend budget, which, remember, is 3 election cycles.
So 10 prime ministers.
Maybe.
In Australia, 18 or something. Yeah, exactly.
But differentiating it against a 4-year strategy, given the way governments tend to work, which is, let's face it, generally glacial, feels maybe doable. 10 years in internet terms is just, it's forever.
Exactly.
Is this just looking too far ahead, budgeting too far ahead, and ignoring the stuff that's going to actually emerge over the next 10 years?
I'm not worried about that so much in the sense of improving security, because quite frankly, the kind of goals set for the strategy are so vague and unmeasurable that it could mean almost anything. I mean, let me just look at it. Here is the vision. A more secure online world for Australians, their businesses, and the essential services on which we depend. I mean, that's not
the marketing brochure, right? That's the marketing brochure.
Actually, yes. That's spot on. The whole thing feels like a political marketing brochure, and we're going to make things cyber better.
Is the timing of this got to do with everything that's going on in China? No one's mentioned China here, but people have hinted very much at China recently when the government's come out and made big announcements about attacks and stuff. If you sort of, connect the dots here, how does it all come together?
There's 2 aspects to that. One is the long time scale. And the answer to that is they did need to do this sometime between April this year, when they promised that it would be done, and October, when allegedly we're going to see a new federal budget, because it didn't happen in May because of COVID-19. So in a sense, no, this is routine. At the micro scale, though, I understand, using that journalistic vague thing because I have a rumour, that the people on the industry panel were told earlier this week that this wouldn't be released until next week. And then suddenly yesterday afternoon, Wednesday, as we record this on Thursday, that suddenly yesterday afternoon, they said, we're launching it tomorrow. So is that, and this is me being a terrible political, tactical, speculating twat.
A professional. You forgot to put professional at the front.
Sorry, yes, you're quite right. Is that because Scott Morrison, Prime Minister of Australia, needed to be seen to be doing something positive in amongst all of this terrible economic news, in amongst the pandemic, in amongst trying to keep Peter Dutton out of the controversy over the Ruby Princess ship, which let infected people loose in Australia and so on? Is it in the wake of the terrible, terrible explosion in Beirut? So Scott Morrison wanted to appear to be strong in some way? Is it because with all these other things happening, the fact that this is an average document could just go out and people wouldn't look too deeply, and tomorrow we're more worried about why there was 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate in a warehouse in Beirut? I don't know. Those rabbit holes we could go down forever, but here we are.
I was interested, when you dig through it, a lot of it seems to be focused on businesses and infrastructure and upgrading their cybersecurity and cyber resilience, which makes a lot of sense, because I know that's one area where, because a lot of our important infrastructure is now in private hands, but these private businesses don't always know how to look after it. But then to throw in all this mums and dads stuff kind of seems to muddy the waters. Is that just so they could get some great headlines? Like I saw one fantastic headline Let me find it in my notes. Australia takes pedophile hunt online with 100 cyber detectives. I don't see how that was your main takeaway from this thing, but for some people it was.
No, it's not. I mean, the things to look at are the Australian Signals Directorate getting 500 new people. And that was part of what was announced back in June. This government's very good at just re-announcing the same things with like one little line added. There is a sense, and this was in the industry advisory panel's input into this, that if you help the bigger organisations provide security down, the government has a more awareness role. And then say, if you're a customer of Telstra or TPG or whoever, it's them who will then help the mums and dads and kids and small businesses improve their stuff as part of that. Part of me sees that as a wonderful way for the telcos to just more money out of the government coffers. It's like trickle-down cybers now that I think about it, isn't it?
Reagan would be proud.
Yeah. So I don't know. And this creates... I mean, this reflects a problem that the overall structure of cybersecurity has in Australia. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of the Australian Signals Directorate, like the ASD was about, that was spookland, right? A few years ago, you would never talk to anyone from that place. They would never talk about what they're doing. The ACSC, the Cybersecurity Centre, was spun off separately to kind of be more open and talk to industry and so on. And then not all that long ago, they had the small to medium enterprises job added to their things. So as an organisation, you have an organisation that was, until a short time ago, Secret Squirrel, and now is meant to be providing advice to Brian the carpenter and his bookkeeper to stop them being cybered up the wazoo. It's an interesting cultural challenge for an organisation, and it really hasn't been solved yet. You can't put out a technical advisory note about reconfiguring your servers or your Cisco router or whatever when these people are like, I can. How do you format this Word document again?
Looking at your ZDNet write-up and keeping on that mums and dads focus, you also mentioned there's a voluntary cybersecurity code for IoT devices. How does a cybersecurity code work if it's voluntary? I mean, don't people just ignore it if they don't have to do it? As with everything else in security?
Okay, so this is a thing that's been kicking around for a while. And now that I remember it, I was actually at one of the think tank meetings where this was approved. There were going to be cyber stars or the Cyberoo rating. And if your device, Internet of Things device, or even just a router or something, was rated 4 Cyberoos or 5 Cyberoos, then just like the energy or water ratings on a washing machine, I mean, okay, there would be some rule that said we've verified that they will have security updates guaranteed for 5 years, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. So that was being put forward as like a consumer law thing. And the government then decided, no, we can't have this as consumer law. Will make it a code of practice. So much of what was in that has been developed by the Internet of Things Association of Australia. They have actually developed a code. And if you follow the code, you get to put a sticker on your device that says you followed the code. You don't have to. You can still sell your product, but it won't have the sticker. And the idea is that the market will solve everything. That's that. That is one of only 2 things about the Internet of Things in the entire strategy. And the other one was just something about consumer awareness, which given the current and the other one was just something about consumer awareness, which given the current government is going to be some really shitty TV ads and TikTok videos.
Well, we look forward to them with great anticipation.
I am really hanging out for Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton to get into TikTok.
Dancing Dutton and the cybersecurity squirrel? I think this could work.
All right, well, and that's scary, scary image. Thank you, Stilgherrian, very much for making the time to join us this week.
My pleasure. I will disturb your thoughts anytime.
So, Alex, why is Google going all in on mid-range handsets when there's premium models around?
Because in 2020, mid-range is the new black, basically. We've reached a point, I think, with smartphones where what you get in the mid-range is really compelling for 99% of the audience. Yeah, there's always going to be a market for kind of the Ferrari of smartphones, as it were, but who's got that kind of money these days? Jen, I know the Pixel 4a was a long time coming. We've been hearing about it for a long time. Were you excited once, it finally landed in your hands?
Yeah, I was excited that it was real. As you say, I've been talking about this. We've all been talking about this for a long period of time now. It started to become kind of a mythical beast. But to actually see it and to prove that we've been talking about something is good. And I actually think that there's some smarts to Google going after this market because they've had a bit of a tough time trying to convince people that they are a genuine alternative to the Apples and the Samsungs of the world. And entering in at this mid-range and really providing a solution for people, I think it's going to be quite popular.
Yeah, the 3A last year, I think, really was ahead of the trend in terms of being a really good, affordable mid-range option. Single camera, but its AI did well. The 4A this year, though, there's a lot more of that mid-range competition around, isn't there?
There is. We've seen so many recently. So we've seen, quite a few from some of the Chinese creators as well. In the mid-range, we've even seen Apple participate with their version of mid-range. So I think that, as you say, it is the new black. Although I don't know whether people will compromise unless they break their current phone.
What are the big compromises that you're looking at in a mid-range phone? What are you giving up as opposed to dropping $2,000 on a flagship?
Well, as Alex mentioned, the back of it, you will only get the one camera. However, it is proof, as Google has shown before, that software makes a huge difference when it comes to photography because it's not slack. I have noticed that the screen is not as good as some of the flagship models, and some things are a bit too vivid and sort of not as clear, for example. And interestingly, Google has decided to go with just one size this year, which may be disappointing for people like myself who like a big phone. You have a choice of one, and you have a choice of that or go without, which is a bit interesting. However, in general, the compromises aren't huge. You will still get a decent phone with great support and some interesting software features because it comes from Google.
Yeah, I guess the flip side of that argument is there are people who want a powerful small phone, and I think this is probably the best Android equivalent to the iPhone SE, which, is similarly small compared to other iPhone models.
Yeah, definitely. There is a market out there for people with small pockets or small hands or very good eyesight or something along those lines. And it is very pocketable. It's the sort of thing that you could easily take with you without being too concerned because it doesn't have a glass exterior as well. And it does feel pretty solid and well put together.
But this is a 5.8-inch phone, right? Or a 5.8-inch screen. A couple of years ago, calling a 5.8-inch phone pocketable would have been laughable. We would have said that was ridiculously too big. So times have really people's tolerance of what's okay.
It's not 2007 anymore, Adam. It's not 2007.
I've got to put new batteries in my watch. But times have really changed there from what people expect and what people think is okay in terms of size.
Oh, definitely. But if you look back, when we were all using the original iPhones, how on earth were we doing that?
Yeah.
It makes the BlackBerry keyboard look enormous. It is in comparison to the iPhone Maxes and the Pro 11s and the Samsung Galaxy Plus something or others. It is quite a small phone by comparison. But as you say, if you're going to compare it to phones from 4 years ago, maybe we should all just get a little bit of a grip.
We're all, though, in the slightly privileged bubble in that we've got hands-on with these devices. We're in the middle of writing reviews and so on. But in fact, they're putting a pretty long lead time on this phone here in Australia. Not quite as bad as the UK, but people are actually going to have to wait a while to get this, aren't they, Jen?
They are, which is a bit strange, but I guess it's one of those things that is just a symptom of 2020. Like, we'll have to wait for a whole lot of things. Apparently, the iPhone's not going to come out for a few, or be launched for a few extra weeks. Potentially, when we see a folding phone come out from a certain company, that will be later to come to Australia by the sounds of it. I think everything is on a bit of a delay this year. And then we've got the strange situation where Google has also said, oh, and by the way, at some point it will also come in 5G if that's what you're into. So people will still have the option of waiting a little bit longer for what is essentially the Tour Edition, the equivalent of a Tour Edition CD for this phone.
The Tour Edition CD with a $200 kind of price point flag based on what they've already said, though.
Exactly, yes. But for some people who really want to make sure that this is the last phone that they buy for the next couple of years and they can access 5G if they decide that they really want it, then maybe that's a good decision.
Do you think that people care about 5G, though, at this mid-range point? Do you think if you're really fussed about things like 5G, then you're more likely to maybe drop $2,000 on a flagship?
I think it's definitely a harder sell in the mid-range market, although 5G is potentially a hard sell for a number of reasons, because potentially you're not in the coverage area right now, for example. Maybe you're listening to celebrity chefs on the internet. There's a few different reasons, but price is certainly very important in this mid-range.
We are seeing, though, a lot of these mid-range 5G handsets right now. I mean, Google will have the Pixel 4a 5G at some indeterminate point in the future, presumably after September 10th when the Pixel 4a itself becomes available. But, I mean, we've got the LG Velvet, we've got the Motorola Edge, I think TCL has an upcoming 5G phone as well, all within this price space. So there's going to be quite a bit of competition. And obviously the manufacturers are betting that the mid-range is ready to buy 5G phones.
It'll be interesting as well, I think, to see what the effect it will be on the market if, as expected, Apple also comes out with a 5G iPhone this year. And like most things, Apple tends to come into these things a little bit later, and once they've taken off a little bit. But I think that potentially that could create a bit of demand and certainly a lot more awareness for 5G. The fact that you'll be able to get it in a handset that's probably at least half the price of whatever iPhone comes out could be appealing for some people.
Jen, I'm going to gaze into my crystal ball and say there is no way on earth that the first 5G iPhone is going to be under $1,000. It's not going to happen.
It would take a miracle, yes.
Not even 2020 is that crazy.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Let's not jinx it.
Well, in terms of getting ahead of ourselves and in terms of those premium flagship models, of course, the other big bit of news this week, and again, it feels like they've been leaked endlessly and been waiting for them for a while, was Samsung's Galaxy Unpacked, which was headlined by, I think it was 5 different variants of a thing called the Note 20.
Samsung just can't help themselves, can they? This is just ridiculous. How long have we been having this conversation about Samsung? It's just insane. If you're going to steal ideas from Apple, steal the idea of 1 or 2 models and keep it simple. Shakes fist at the clouds.
Oh, look, they like to keep us occupied, apparently.
Jen, what's actually exciting about these new phones?
The names.
Oh my gosh, there are some corker names in there. In terms of the notes, because there was a big package, an ecosystem, as they say, of gadgets involved in this launch overnight. In terms of the notes, I really like the design, just on a superficial level, because the notes have often sort of been the hand-me-down phones in terms of design. Like, they get whatever camera comes out in the S series, and they all look a little bit alike because they're so large. I think the iconic kind of recognizable design on the back of it was quite good this year. Of course, they're out in rose gold, which is quite prominent. However, they've given it another new name because that's what you have to do to rose gold, apparently, in order to keep it gender fluid, as they said in the presentation for reasons that still escape me. It now has to be called Mystic Bronze.
Is that because Rose is a girl's name? Is that why it's not gender fluid? I'm just trying to understand the thinking here.
I don't understand. I was also told at one stage that the Z Flip in purple was gender neutral. And maybe that's the same thinking that then applies to Mystic Bronze. I'm not really sure. I'd love to see a scale
The good thing is anybody could dance under the name Mystic Bronze. That is definitely a gender-neutral name. That's a stripper name no matter who you are and who you love.
Oh, I know what I want to call my next pet. But in addition to all of those superficial things, you are getting a huge screen, what seems like quite a powerful machine. There seems to be a bit of improvement to the S Pen, which all the Note users who seem to be quite loyal absolutely love, and could be potentially quite useful in terms of, I think, avoiding printers in your home office. Apparently, it's going to be a lot faster and there's less latency this year. And there's been one improvement to the camera that it seems to have otherwise received from the S series that was released earlier this year, and that is the addition of laser autofocus, which we've seen in other devices previously, but essentially helps the camera get focused faster. So I'm keen to test that out.
They did also dial back the ridiculous space zoom claims for these models. You don't get the 100 times you got on the S20 Ultra. I think it's 50 times on the Note 20 Ultra. I'm not holding my breath for it being great, but it's less.
No, and I think with those space zoom claims, like they were a headline essentially, but they're one of those photos that you could probably guess it, but whether you should or not is a different thing. Like if you saw Keanu all the way over in the next suburb, potentially you could get the world's grainiest photo of him. But would you go to a magazine with it? No, it's for your personal collection only.
It's the Impressionist art gallery Keanu sad meme, basically.
Exactly. You don't know if he's happy or sad, but you can assume.
They're not starting out cheap, though, are they? I mean, the cheapest Note 20, which is a 4G only model, is $14.99, and the top tier Note 20 Ultra 5G, like you said, the names are insane.
What a corker of a name!
$21.99. Is that too much for a phone in 2020? Given that we're in 2020.
Well, it's interesting. So I was talking to somebody yesterday, an analyst, about this, and it is $200 more than we saw last year, which is not out of the realms given that the Australian dollar has not been doing us huge favours, and also because this is a lot of technology that's packed into a phone. He was saying that there could be sort of a division within Australia where, people who haven't been so affected by the economic conditions do end up wanting to invest more in technology because they're using it so darn much. For example, I've never used my mobile phone more than I have in 2020. All my phone calls come through on it. All my life kind of gets interrupted on it. So potentially there are buyers out there for a very expensive phone that is, unmistakably targeted at high-end users, at people who want all of the power inside these phones. However, there's going to be a lot of people who just go $2,200. You have got to be kidding me.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that they were launching a whole ecosystem of devices. They've also got new wearables, including a new watch. And I've got to say, this is the first Samsung Galaxy Watch I've been genuinely excited to get my hands on for some time.
Ooh. It does look like they've put some real effort into this. And they have been making watches for longer than Apple has. But there have been a lot of different versions of these watches, and I have them all. I have a whole series of ridiculous watches, including the First Gear, which was massive and looked like some sort of space age bracelet.
That was the one with the pervert camera on it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had that one too. Yes, that was a different one. I took some weird photos with that. But this one, they brought back the bezel, which I think everybody really likes. So you can actually spin.
This is why I'm excited. I love that bezel.
It is a very attractive bezel. I'm a little bit concerned that makes it a bit chunkier.
Why do you need a bezel? What's so good about having a bezel?
So in this case, Adam, everything's got to have a bezel, otherwise the insides of the phone would fall out. But in this case, it's a rotating bezel. So it's a circular watch.
Oh, yeah.
And you turn the whole it's like a little wheel on the outside.
Like a diving watch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they had it, and then they dropped it, and they said, people don't really want it. They'll like this digital one we've got, which never worked all that well, was a bit of a disaster. Yeah. And I don't think Samsung actually listens to me much at all, but I kept complaining at them and saying, bring back the rotating bezel, and it sounds like they listened.
Nice.
Look, it wasn't just you. A lot of people liked that bezel, and it was a really good way to kind of, to go through a watch's menus. It was really kind of, addictive and like your very own fidget spinner on your wrist too, which is quite nice. I'm glad that it's back. But I think one of the more probably the more useful parts of this ultimately will be that watch has a lot of sensors in it and a lot of health sensors. So even if we're still waiting for the TGA to approve things like blood pressure, I understand, and also electrocardiogram functionality, they're promising that you can do things on this like check your blood oxygen saturation levels, which is particularly important when everyone's very concerned about a respiratory illness, for example.
How do you do that with a watch?
Magic.
Okay.
Basically,
Good to know.
well,
Magic TM.
I'm not across 100% of the tech of it, Adam, but if you've been into a hospital, and I was in one earlier this week, thankfully out again, you know that little thing they clip on your finger with the lights and so on?
Yeah.
You do that with the back of the watch.
But so they don't have to break the skin to measure the oxygen in your blood. They don't have to test your blood.
It's an oximeter. And you put it normally on the tip of your finger, like Alex says. And so potentially you can do that with the light at the back of this watch, which I would really like.
Yeah, they did test a watch, obviously, with little vampire fangs that sunk into you, but consumers did not like that.
No, it's a niche market.
Funny.
Now, Jen, the other thing that they announced, well, let me put it this way. If I went into a certain dispensary in, say, California and asked for some Galaxy Bud Live, I'd get a very different product to what Samsung was offering up this week, wouldn't I?
So it's that kind of podcast now. All right. We'll get Elon on.
This has taken a dark turn. I believe you are referring to what I will forever call ear beans.
I am indeed.
Samsung launched their new earbuds, and they don't look like their old ones. They also have a kind of a silly name, but they look like beans that you put in your ear. And I'm kind of all for it, surprisingly, given how strange they look.
So beans like magic beans.
Exactly, magic sound beans. If they'd called them magic sound beans, everybody would have been on board.
Are they IP rated? Are they IP rated? Can I bury them in the ground and expect a beanstalk the next day?
Look, if that's on the packet, I will be surprised, but you can try.
What you do with your review unit in the privacy of your own home is totally up to you, man.
By the way, with review units, these stick right inside your ear. Like they're very much kind of like the Pixel Buds that we saw recently. They go right inside that ear canal. They've got no pipe cleaner sticking out. I don't want to be able to get these secondhand. I think that it's important to just have one run with them because they're very intimate devices. There
is at least one Samsung PR person who I know listens to this podcast. I will not accept them secondhand. They'll go in the bin if you do that to me. And I don't think that's actually an unreasonable thing, actually.
No,
people shouldn't share earbuds generally. It's actually a really bad hygiene idea, even in the best of times, let alone the 2020 of times.
Exactly. But the good thing about this is because they fit so closely into your ear, then potentially you're not sort of telling the world that you're wearing them, which is helpful. They're potentially not going to fall out as much, although I haven't tried them, so I'm not really sure. And Samsung is saying that they provide clear audio, which is important when we're on the phone all the darn time at the moment. Plus, they have noise cancellation, which puts them up there with sort of the leading earbuds that we're seeing at the moment.
It's a super competitive market, that true wireless space. I mean, there's everything from like your $50 cheap and cheerfuls up to really high-end pro audio-grade stuff. So I think they've got a bit of a tough battle there. Where they are leading the way, though, is in the one thing that they're sort of not telling us much about till the end of the month, the new version of the Galaxy Fold. But it's not the Galaxy Fold 2, is it, Jen?
No, I'm so excited about this device. I cannot fully express to you how excited I am because potentially I'm going to be Penny from Inspector Gadget, and that's the only thing I've got in my head. The only thing I'm not excited about is the name, which I can barely remember. I believe this is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2.
Yeah.
And if we could just call it like Foldy McPhone, I think that would be much better and much easier for the rest of us.
Jen, your talents are wasted here. You're on the wrong side of the fence. You should be over there in marketing.
Well, here's the thing. I think one of the best things about this new phone is that they listened to me when I said that the front screen on the old Fold, on the first one that they brought out, was just way too small to be usable.
Testify.
So if they're listening to this, if they want to take Foldy McPhone from me, they can have it for free. That's fine.
Well, look, sorry, we're claiming copyright. If they want Foldy McPhone, they can supply us each with a Foldy McPhone.
Absolutely.
That's it. Deal done. Because this new phone, to me, really I'm quite impressed. And now I'm sort of partial to these sorts of folding phones and also large phones, as I mentioned. But potentially, like, this has a very nice screen in the middle of it that it folds out to become its, computer book. It works at different angles, which the other one didn't. It was either flat or it wasn't, whereas this one you can sort of prop it up like you do with a Z Flip. It has glass on the front screen rather than plastic this time, and potentially you can't peel that off if you're an early American reviewer and wreck it for everybody else. Apparently it has weird, like, kind of vacuum, brushes in the middle of it to stop any dust getting into the crevices. And as I mentioned, it's got the great screen on the front of it that won't be so small that it sort of takes you back to the old iPhone 4 days. So overall, I'm super impressed, and I want to see this phone, although we didn't see that much of it overnight.
Look, we didn't, and they have said they're going to announce, I think it's the 1st of September is going to be when they formally start talking about that. And as I think you said earlier, we'll probably see it in Australia later than the rest of the world. I am, however, slightly concerned by how many of Adam's children I'm going to have to mortgage to be able to afford one.
I'm looking at all of those old Samsung watches and just thinking, if I sold all of them, can I afford like half of one of these folding phones? I think it's going to be a tiny bit expensive, but I'm still really interested in seeing it and testing it, and I'm willing to wear whatever hazmat suit I have to do to go into a store and do that.
You can always wait 6 months for the brother of a Colombian drug lord to release the knockoff version.
Look, let's keep it on the agenda just in case. And also, Foldy McPhone is available for that person too. It's just a case of who gets in first.
Sounds fabulous. Actually, speaking of expensive phones, we also had another phone come. That just kept coming this week because Huawei finally announced local availability for the Huawei P40 Pro Plus.
Rolls off the tongue. Absolutely rolls off the tongue.
Now, we've talked about Huawei's problems in terms of not having Android. This is not an Android phone, or not even Google, I should say. This is not a Google-equipped Android phone. Jen, is it worth getting excited and spending north of $2,000 on a non-Google phone in 2020?
Oh, that's hard. Like, it's hard to sell, even though I love it, like a folding, expensive, potentially $3,000 phone or more. But to sell a phone that's worth $2,000 and doesn't come with all of the apps you require, and you have to put in so much effort to actually get things working, I think it's a really hard ask.
Yeah, it's tough because the camera tech on it, absolutely. Now, I'll be honest, I've not had hands-on time with it, but the camera tech, based on what the P40 Pro was like, sounds amazing. Huawei really has been leading the field in a hardware sense that way. But the apps thing, and especially the weird petal search thing that they're doing to try and overcome the app limit, really, really concerns me.
It does, and I've heard of other people. I haven't tried it myself because I haven't had review devices from Huawei in a while, but I've read the reports of other people just trying to sideload things and trying to get things working and trying to use the UI without Google services. It concerns me a lot. I think that you would be in for maybe a world of pain, maybe at the very least a long time trying to get it to the way you want it, and then try to keep it updated to the way you want it. As you say, the camera technology is really interesting. They have a deal with Leica. A lot of the things that we see on Huawei cameras end up filtering down into the cameras of other devices. I just don't know if people are willing to put up with the pain and put out $2,000 in order to achieve that pain.
Yeah, because it's not just the pain, it's the risk as well. So I probably should have explained this earlier. Pedal search it's this interesting tech that Huawei's developed because they've got their own app store, the App Gallery, which is slowly getting there. But there's a lot of apps that you will want that it doesn't have. That's just sadly the fact of it. So what they've said is, okay, well, you can sideload, but sideloading is tough if you're not technically inclined. So they've built Pedal Search, which is this search engine that will go out onto the wider internet and find you APKs. Those are the install packages for Android.
Oh, it sounds like a security nightmare.
You got it in one, Adam.
Oh, my goodness.
And I chased them on this earlier this week to say, look, what kind of guarantees are you giving people? How much transparency on where these things are and how trustworthy they are? And they say, consumers will have to judge that themselves.
Oh.
And that just, alarm bells flashing in my head. This is not a good idea. It's an interesting technology, but it's not a good
bad
idea.
It's really not. It's like saying, we found these awesome websites for you. Go and have a look and see if you can work out which one is the malware and which one is the ransomware and which one will send emails to all of your mates. You might get lucky. It could be fine.
I do want to actually test this phone out. I do want to see what the hardware is like, because people have done some interesting hack things with these to get more Google services on them or sideload Amazon.
Because there's no security problems there either, is there?
Well, yeah, look. You are taking your risks with all of this, and I think that's probably maybe less of an issue if you're spending like $300 on a phone. But when you're spending $2,000, it should just work.
Yeah,
you expect a certain level of operational functionality. Yes, that's so much work. It's like a pet project, but with money as well.
Well, that once again wraps up another fine episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Jen for making time for us this week and joining us in the studio.
My pleasure.
Now, Jen, if people want to find you, where can they find your work and your social media online?
They can find me on Twitter pretty much all of the time at Jen Dudley. Otherwise, I write for a bunch of News Corp publications, including Daily Telly, Courier Mail, Herald Sun, the whole network.
Sounds fabulous. And thanks also to Stilgherrian for making the time for the show. And of course, if you want to catch up with us, you'll find us on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU, online at verticalhold.com.au, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for listening. Hang in there, 2020, we're getting through it. A big shout out to all our new listeners who've joined us. Don't forget to jump on your podcasting platform of choice and leave us a review. It really does help people discover the show so we can spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. I think we need to refer to him as professional enemy of the state.
Look, I'll go with that.
He'll go with that. Right. We'll see if we can fit it in somewhere.